With close to 50 million albums sold and 9 Grammy Awards to her name, Norah Jones is a musical force. Billboard once named her the top jazz artist of the decade, and all in the span of 14 years. She was in her early 20s when she began. She's in her late 30s now. Norah is in Toronto to promote.
Ouch.
Sorry. I can't even tell you how old I am.
Okay. I love being described by my age. Yeah.
No, it's just a span of your career. Nora's in Toronto to promote her upcoming album entitled Daybreaks, which is out on October 7th. And it sees her revisiting, to some extent, her jazz roots. There is an inclusive beauty, curiosity, and elegance to her sound, and we're very, very glad to have her here for a visit at Jazz FM 91. Norah, thank you very much for dropping by.
Thanks.
Negating the reference to your career in age and years, how does it feel when you were faced with some of the remarkable statistics that someone like myself is relaying at the beginning of an interview like this?
I don't think about that stuff unless I'm doing interviews, which people usually mention it, but it's crazy, but, it's fine. I just make music, and that's kind of how I have to think of what I do.
What do you think when you begin a project like this? And from having listened to some of it and having read some of the material, it is a revisiting of your jazz roots to some extent. And I'm wondering about the person you are versus the person you were, 14 or so years ago. What do you think that you are bringing to jazz now?
I don't think of myself as bringing anything to jazz. Again, this is something that I feel like journalists think of word-wise.
How to write.
When I make music, I'm not thinking about what I'm bringing to a genre. I'm just thinking about the songs and bringing them to life. And I think some of the songs on this record are definitely more in the jazz genre than anything I've ever done. And some of them aren't. But I don't think of it in those terms, I guess.
Well, part of the story is about the revisiting 2 years ago. You were in Washington for the Blue Note celebration, Blue Note 75.
Yeah.
And you were encountering Wayne Shorter and Brian Blade.
Mm-hmm.
And, my sense is that there was some sort of inspiration that was developed from that time period.
Yeah, that was a super fun night. I mean, it's interesting. I was thinking about it last night, and it was a really nice moment for me because I was seeing all these amazing people play and getting to play with some of my idols, Wayne and Brian Blade, of course. And I was inspired by it, mostly because of the music, of course, but also just the sense of community. And, I've talked a lot about genres the last few days, doing a lot of interviews for the record, and people get kind of hung up on it. But more than the genre, because it was a really wide variety of music that night. Yes, it was all jazz, but, that's a wide variety there, It was the sense of community and, hanging out with Robert Glasper, who I went to jazz camp with when we were 15 years old.
Wow.
So, band camp, basically, for jazz nerds. I don't know, just the sense of community was really nice, and hanging out with a lot of people who I hadn't seen in years.
Maybe we approach it from jazz because we're a jazz radio station. And maybe rather than speaking to that, let's talk about some of the personalities. If I can.
That's kind of what I mean.
Sure.
Like these incredible musicians, and they're all so different, which is really amazing. Like this genre, there's a lot of branches, and the stuff that's popular now, the Kamasi Washington stuff, and talk about different types of music,
But one could argue that was always the case. If you think about Miles Davis or Coltrane or any, they're always being influenced by the sounds that were around them. Do you mind if you and I play a little bit of a name game and I just sort of throw out a name and you could give me your impression or maybe an experience? Because you mentioned Wayne Shorter, and I wanted to get your perspective on him and having collaborated with him.
Yeah, it was super fun. He's an incredible human and personality, and then his music is just so... It's not, he doesn't play notes. He just kind of plays what he's feeling. There's no notes there. It's just an emotion. It's like a paintbrush, when he's playing. He's a very giving musician, and it was incredible playing with him.
You mentioned the paintbrush because the last time that Christian McBride was in town, he said that Brian Blade was the anti-drummer, and that he essentially just paints instead of drumming.
Same with Brian, That's why I love playing with him. But he reacts to everything you're doing, but he also can lay down a simple groove, and be very supportive with a singer, that he kind of does it all. That's why I really wanted to record with him, because I had some songs on this album that were very in one direction, sort of playing into this whole idea of making a jazz record. And then some songs on the record are not quite in the same direction. And I wanted somebody who could help me kind of weave everything together. And then we could end up just being more true to the songs and figuring out how it all sounded that way.
It seems to me that collaboration is a major aspect of your development as an artist. Would you agree?
Yeah.
So what is it about that act that you learn from?
I guess I'm not a good sit-at-home practicer. I do way better just booking gigs in small clubs and practicing that way and making mistakes, but having a great time. You learn something from everyone you play with, and I've played with some really random different types of people, so it's been really exciting to be able to do that, in my career.
My Toronto friends will dislike me if I don't mention another name.
Kevin,
right?
Yeah.
Could you speak to Kevin?
Oh God, Kevin's an incredible musician. I remember he played on my first album, the first session I did for my first album, or the second session, and then he played on my second album, and he toured with me. But I had been a fan of Kevin since I was a fan of that Cassandra Wilson album, New Moon Daughter, and Kevin's all over that album, and I just love that guy.
Yeah, he's pretty remarkable.
He's amazing. Talk about energy and creativity. I mean, he can come up with 50 different parts.
It's a little bit of magic, or a lot of magic, really. Okay, you mentioned, or we've talked about Wayne Shorter and Brian Blade. And I don't know if you've actually met her or have spent any time or collaborated at all, but I always wondered about your thoughts about Joni Mitchell.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was a huge Joni Mitchell fan starting in college. Yeah, and actually some of my favorite Joni stuff is from the 90s. She put 2 records out, I think called Turbulent Indigo was one. The other one was Taming the Tiger, and Wayne Shorter plays on those albums. And I love those albums, and they're beautiful. And the way Wayne plays on them, it's like the paintbrush thing. I mean, he just like weaves these little threads through the whole album, and they're just pretty amazing.